An angel has no memory.
Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around I've got a couple of 1960s groovy science fiction movies for you. The reason I'm doing them, and the reason I'm doing such light films this time, is that the last few days I've had some very heavy films in front of my eyeballs. Yesterday I watched The Apprentice, and I also watched Joker Folie à Deux. I'm doing reviews of those for the Monday video, so stick around for that. But I also, the night before, spent 3 hours watching this film, which I love, and it's probably in my top 10. La Dolce Vita. Federico Fellini has got Marcello Mastroianni in it. Just a wonderful piece of cinema and totally unlike anything else and very influential. So I got on a Marcello Mastroianni kick because I'm a film buff. And so for the Saturday Science Fiction Saturday video, I decided I was going to do a Marcello Mastroianni science fiction film. I've talked about it briefly on the channel before, but I love it enough that I'm going to give it another run through. That, of course, is Elio Petri's La Decima Vittima, The 10th Victim. Also stars Ursula Andress and Elsa Martinelli. Music by one of my favourite Italian film composers, Piero Piccioni. It's just a groovy movie, and I will defend it on the basis of the fact that the world building on this is far superior than the world building in any 1960s American science fiction movie. But I also decided to go with a little bit of froth, and that particular froth is Barbarella. This, of course, isn't the grand new release of Barbarella with all the bells and whistles and all of the extras on it. It's a very bare-bone Blu-ray release. When I was a kid and I was looking around for movie posters to stick up on the wall of my bedroom, I really wanted a Barbarella movie poster, but I couldn't find one within my price range. And that was even before I saw the movie. So the double feature I've got for you today is Barbarella, followed by The 10th Victim, based on a story by Robert Sheckley. So having tossed a coin, I'm going to start first with Barbarella. There is so much to love in Barbarella. Right from the very start, you get that zero-G striptease, which was actually done on a big sheet of Perspex, and the whole set was rotated so that the camera was shooting down at Jane Fonda. It may have been on a slight angle, but still, they maintain the illusion of it being zero-G. And when Jane Fonda starts taking off her spacesuit, there's not going to be a lot of people that really minded how they did it. It's a great way to do the titles. Plus, you've got that banging theme song by Charles Fox and Bob Crewe, which just works. The whole soundtrack to Barbarella is luscious. In fact, that's probably the biggest common thread between the two movies I'm talking about. They both have killer soundtracks. I also like some of the practical physical effects that they use in Barbarella as well. There's that bit where the dark opaqueness of her helmet slowly reveals her face. And I think they did it by having some kind of oil inside a layer in the helmet and filming it in reverse so that the oil rose up through the helmet. It's a really nice practical effect, and it sells itself quite well. In fact, there are a number of practical effects in this movie that really make an interesting way of giving us the world of Barbarella. Now, of course, it was based on the Jean-Claude Forest graphic novels and the comic books. Strays a lot from that, but the basic bones are there. And right from the start, you get those fantastic set designs. You get the shag pile carpeted spaceship. You get a doorway, which is disguised as a copy of Seurat's A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of Le Grand Jatte. Beautifully luscious and really detailed, even if a lot of the content itself is fluff. There's just a sumptuousness to the look of this film, which is something you don't particularly see in modern science fiction movies. You don't get luscious interiors in science fiction movies very much. Then, of course, you get Claude Dauphin playing the president of Earth, who gives Barbarella the job of going to this Tau City and finding a missing Earth scientist, Duran Duran, yes, the band got its name from this, who went missing 5 years ago and holds the secret to the positronic ray, which will zap things into the fourth dimension. There's a lot of technobabble in this movie, but I'm there for that. And Barbarella is kind of naive. She's from a very peaceful Earth where war is an anathema and people are peaceful and high-tech and civilized. So when she goes to the rough and ready world of Tau City, she's definitely a fish out of water. I'm not at all convinced I'd like to live on Barbarella's Earth because making love with pills and, hand gestures is not something I'd particularly be interested in. Then you can move into all that stuff with Mark Hand, played by Ugo Tognazzi, and the feral children and their weird little robot dolls that chew people for no good reason, and a sled being pulled by a kind of ice stingray. And eye-poppingly interesting special effects, which don't really have anything to do with the plot, but are very much there to fill out the world. Even that weird design of Barbarella's spaceship is unlike anything you've seen before. It doesn't look like a spaceship, it looks like something that holds cassettes. There's also some very kind of groovy details in this as well. The fact that Professor Ping, the man who is trapped in the labyrinth along with a lot of other people, is played by Marcello in a speaking part, where Marcello was known as a mime. The only other time Marcello, I think, speaks in a major motion picture is he gets to say the only word spoken in Mel Brooks' silent movie. And I'm kind of there for that. I think he does a nice job of it. We've got the iconic John Philip Law playing Pygar, the last of the ornithanthropes, an angel. And John Philip Law, for whatever his limitations were as an actor, makes a bloody good angel. He's got the stature for it, he's got the looks, he's got the wings. Then we've got Milo O'Shea playing Duran, who's as mad as a cut snake. He has an exaltation machine where he spends his time since leaving Earth with the positronic ray, building a machine that kills people with pleasure, which when you drill deep is a pretty messed up way to spend 5 years of your life, making an enormous kind of hammered organ that kills people with orgasms.
Hello, pretty.
And then you've got Anita Pallenberg with the voice of Joan Greenwood dubbed in, playing the Great Tyrant. And she's kind of cool and slinky and dangerous in this, and definitely has a hots for Barbarella as well as Pygar. So there's a kind of implicit bisexuality there that makes it a little bit more kinky and interesting. Now, Barbarella was filmed in Dino De Laurentiis' studio in Rome, and there's so much production value in it. The labyrinth of night, where there are people embedded into the walls of the labyrinth, is sumptuous to look at, apart from the lovely people and the partial nudity you get in that. It's just an incredibly well-designed world within a world. You get the same when you get up to the city of Sogo, which is a contraction of Sodom and Gomorrah, of course. And the production design there with giant inflatable pillows and strange cages full of feral carnivorous budgerigars and finches. All of that kind of stuff is beautifully sumptuous. The production designs are beautiful to look at. There's the funky psychedelic background of the Chamber of Dreams, which looks fantastic. And the evocation of the Mathmos, the giant blob monster of evil that sleeps beneath the city. All of that stuff is beautifully evoked. They must have used every piece of plexiglass in Rome to make this movie. As much as anything else, I love it for the production design. The costume designs as well are terrific. The music, the silliness of the plot, Jane Fonda being the straight man as Barbarella, it's kind of fun. Now, of course, the movie was directed by her husband at the time, Roger Vadim, and looking at it from a modern viewpoint, it's a very sex-positive movie. Barbarella has a lot of agency with her romantic encounters in this movie. That makes it play a little bit better to a modern audience than a lot of other films have. And the fact that she actually breaks the orgasmatron machine that Duran has, just by basically out-orgasming a machine and making it blow all the circuits, is kind of cool. It's a little bit of female empowerment in a weird way, where the sleazy guy who's trying to kill her with pleasure has his machine blow up because she can out-pleasure the machine. Watching Barbarella this time, I'm just impressed with the level of detail in the set design and the construction, and the weird little bits of business, like when she meets the revolutionary Dildano, played by David Hemmings, just his weird little underground hideout. It's got these weird tubes that are used for transportation, and it's got a map of Sogo with little lights showing where their secret hideouts are. It's just a wonderfully designed movie. I would really like to see any kind of science fiction movie made in a modern context, which has that level of set design. Yes, there's a lot of stuff these days you can fake with CGI, and all strength to them for doing that. But just on the physical level of production design, I want to see some science fiction movies that really enhance the world by having bespoke pieces of set that tell us we're not in a familiar place. There are also little in-jokes in there. There's a Landveer joke, the Welsh one. There's also the fact that the two twins that we see, who first we see out on the ice fields being hunted down by Mark Hand, and then we see in the city of Sogo. Their names are Stomoxis and Glossina, which are the names of two species of flies. The second one is the tsetse fly. So you've got these weird little bits of business. There are a whole bunch of different people who wrote this script, which can be seen as a weakness or can be seen as a collaborative effort. I'll put up here all the names of the people who worked on this script based on Jean-Claude Forest's original works. For a long time that was seen as a bad thing, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's all part of the mix. And putting in Stomoxis and Glossina and all those little bits of business is something one of the writers thought of and decided to incorporate into the movie. I like Barbarella as a nostalgia piece. When it hit, particularly drive-in cinemas here in Australia in the 60s, it was crazily popular. There was, of course, the titillation of the bits of nudity, which was very rare in films that were released in Australia at the time. And I suggest that they might have had little tiny bits cut out by the local censors at the time because they did that all the time, the bastards. It had a large cultural impact. Those Barbarella posters were available in poster shops. I could never afford one, unfortunately. The best one I got was for $1, which was a lot of money to me then. I got the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms poster instead, and the one of Billy and Captain America from Easy Rider. But I could never afford a colour poster, which was the Barbarella one. Kind of tempted to do it now, but I don't have anywhere to put it up. So just to summarise on Barbarella, fantastic banger soundtrack, beautifully sumptuously designed movie, totally unrealistic, totally off the wall, crazy. You kind of don't know whether it's designed to be a soft adult film or whether it's designed to be an art house film or whether it's designed to be a science fiction movie. It kind of crosses all those borders. And Dino De Laurentiis, as the producer, gave them the money to do weird things, and the weird things are there on the screen. And I like it for that. I'll watch it every few years and have a bit of fun. I've got the soundtrack on one of my Spotify playlists, and I play it regularly. It's pretty good driving music. I know I'm going to get comments for people who are still cheesed off with Jane Fonda because of the Vietnam War, which was a fair while ago, and maybe it's time to drop that. And I was going to match it up with a different movie. I was going to do Danger Diabolic. But then, because of the Marcello Mastroianni thing and spending 3 hours watching La Dolce Vita, I decided to go with La Decima Vittima, The 10th Victim, directed by Elio Petri, music by Piero Piccioni, produced by Carlo Ponti, who was the husband of Sophia Loren. The 10th Victim is a killer movie. It builds a weird world, and a world which is based on ours because there are a lot of the same cars, there are many of the same buildings, though it does do a lot of things with great modern Italian architecture, with middle century Italian architecture, and also some of the brutalist architecture that was created during the fascist regime of Mussolini. The movie starts out in New York City with The Hunt, which is kind of like a drilled down version of The Purge. In order to create peace in the world, because apparently peace is caused by human aggression rather than politics and ideology and religion and other things. It's all about people wanting to have an outlet for their violence, which I think is a very unnuanced view of the way the world actually is. But you've got a future where there's the hunt, and there are some rules to the hunt. I'm going to read them off for you. First off, if you join the hunt and decide you want to be a part of this, and there is a lot of money involved in becoming a successful person in the hunt, you've got to be part of 10 hunts, 5 as the hunter and 5 as the victim. The hunter in each scenario knows all of the details of the victim, but the victim doesn't know who the hunter is. There's a prize for each successful hunt, and if you become a decaton and you win all 10 hunts, you get $1 million, which was a lot of money in those days. You also get transport discounts and you get a free government car. And the first time we see the hunt is right at the start, where there is an Italian guy narrating the rules for the hunt, who's actually the maitre d' at a thing called the Massacre Club, which is an S&M bar, where the first hunt we see ends. And we see a hunter who's hunting Carolyn Meredith, played by Ursula Andress, through the streets of New York. And Petri uses New York locations really interestingly. The bridges and the skyscrapers and the broad streets, all that's used really effectively as this hunter tracks Carolyn down to the Massacre Club. And then, of course, she defeats him with some unusual underwear. And if you've seen the movie, you know what I mean. So you've got that, and it also sells the internationality of the hunt, and that everywhere in the world uses the hunt, including China. There's a bit where Marcello Mastroianni's character, Marcello Boletti, is watching a successful hunt. And the guy who succeeds is actually in China. And there's a big celebration in China because they have their first decaton, person who won 10 hunts. Now, the supporting cast, apart from Ursula Andress playing Carolyn Meredith and Marcello Mastroianni playing Marcello Boletti, you've got Elsa Martinelli playing Olga, Marcello's new girlfriend. He's having his marriage from his wife annulled. He's got a new girlfriend who wants to marry him, and it's Elsa Martinelli, who's a beautiful actress. And you also have Massimo Serrato playing his assistant, the guy who helps him with the administration around the hunts. And he's pretty good in this as well. We also see Marcello winning one of his hunts with a pair of exploding boots. It's at an equestrian event. The thing that this starts to tell us about Marcello is he's a very passive hunter. He tends to want to do things indirectly and obliquely. And this first hunt that he wins, which is actually his ninth, finding a way to win the hunt in a way that's kind of slightly removed. Now that buys into Marcello Mastroianni's kind of passive persona. If you have a look at his character in La Dolce Vita, he moves passively through a lot of the events in the movie. He's never aggressive and never the aggressor. His charm and his looks brings the women to him, which is kind of useful. And we find out some weird things about Marcello, which are very groovy and very pop culture. And this movie's got pop art all over it. The production design and the set design in this is chef's kiss. There are buildings and living quarters in this movie that I'd love to live in, as long as there was room for a lot of Blu-rays and DVDs. And you see weird things like his little pet robot, Tommaso, is really a weird thing, but it's kind of got a slight bit of AI in it, though that's never emphasized. And Tommaso rolls into the ending of the movie as well, in an interesting way. We have people flying Pan Am, the extinct airline, so that the future in which this movie takes place still has Pan Am. And we also know that Marcello collects comic books and really likes the Phantom comics, which my friend Trev would really like because Trev collects Phantom comics as well. So you've got that kind of layering of popular culture into the movie, popular culture as we know it now. And the fact that Marcello is a comic book collector makes him extra weird in a 1960s context, when people who collected comic books very often, and to a certain extent still are, looked down upon. But with this hunt, Marcello's got a problem. He's too broke to mount a decent defence, who he suspects might be Carolyn as she approaches him to interview him for a project she's doing about Italian men, ostensibly, but she's actually the hunter. But Marcello's too broke because he has to pay off his annulment with his ex-wife. He has a girlfriend. His furniture gets repossessed. He's not financially viable, and yet he knows that his hunter is very well resourced, and so he's got to use his wits about him. He's doing all these weird side hustles, like he started a cult of people who worship the sun setting, and they go to a beach down near Fiumicino in the evening to worship the sun going down, and he does that as a side hustle even though he doesn't believe it. So you've got that weird bit of world building there, and there's all these little details of world building in this movie, which are fascinating, and particularly for a 1960s audience. This is a 1966 movie. Things like having roadside brothels, which are kind of like service stations or like gas stations, where you just park your car there off the highway and get your ashes hauled and then get back on the road again. And it's all part of society and is very much accepted. And the weird thing, like, people are hiding their elderly parents because there's a thing called an elderly collection centre, which euthanizes people when they get past a certain age. But because society is kind of loosey-goosey, most people, particularly in Italy, we find out, hide their parents. They Anne Frank their parents to hide them from the government collections. And this is kind of an accepted part of society. First off, there are elderly collection centres. And the second part is people hide their parents, and everyone goes, yeah, everybody does that. I kind of like that because it's deep world building for a movie as frivolous as this, and that works. There's just so many eye-popping details, both physically and mentioned in the movie, make it one of the best future worlds built into a 1960s movie. That layering of detail and the visual look of things, the fact that Marcello's flat's got this big robot eye as a part of the wall art, and the decorations at the house that his ex-wife has because he had to give it to her after the annulment, the beautiful artwork, the pop artwork, and the fact that there's a cafe on a rooftop where there are little intercom systems in case you want to talk to anybody else who's having a meal there. And that cafe also has a couple of guys playing saxophone as part of the ambience. There's just deep weirdness in this movie, all of which probably didn't cost a lot from a budgetary point of view, but it's there purely to texture the world in which this love story of these two people, and it is ultimately a love story, and that's quite a silly ending, in a world which is recognisable but alien as well. I love the way it does that, and the way that that movie gives us something we hadn't seen in cinema before. I think there are a lot of more modern films set in the future which could learn a lot from The 10th Victim on how to give us a world which is extrapolated but also has some deeply weird aspects to it when we think about it just a little bit more. I love this movie, and that Piero Piglione music is terrific. It's a soundtrack I really like, particularly a tune in there called Spiral Waltz, which also has vocal versions in English and Italian. Perfect 1960s pop art, op art movie. If I was going to do a movie festival of this kind of movie, I'd do The 10th Victim, I'd do Danger Diabolic, I'd probably do The President's Analyst. There's a wonderfulness to the aesthetic of this kind of movie at that time, which is just lovely. And it kind of reminds me of a scene I saw in The Apprentice this week, where young Donald Trump, played by Sebastian Stan, is at a party and meets Andy Warhol and doesn't know who Andy Warhol is because he's all about money and real estate, and Andy Warhol's about money and art. And so there's a crossover of that. Just that kind of weirdness struck me when I was watching The 10th Victim this time around. Two groovy 1960s movies which aren't deep and aren't kind of going to leave you thinking for hours and hours after you watch them. They're entertainments pure and simple, but they're honest entertainments as well. This one's over the top and trying to be saucy. This one's over the top and trying to amuse us. If you're going to look at humour, I think The 10th Victim's got funnier humour than the humour in Barbarella, even though the humour in Barbarella is a lot of fun. And appreciating the amount of craftsmanship that went into creating the worlds of both of them. So that's it for this time around. Thanks very much for watching. If you like the video, please like, subscribe particularly, and leave a comment. Let me know what you think of these two and whether you can think of any other movies that might have gone well with these two. You can also support the channel by becoming a channel member, or you can become a patron and support the channel at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. And I'm planning a couple of things for the Patreon supporters in the very near future. On Monday's video, I'm going to be reviewing The Apprentice and also Joker Folie à Deux. So until all of that happens, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Get yourself some Marcello Mastroianni, and I'll catch you next time.